I'm going to tell a story, and I'm going to use the word cancer a lot, so I apologize in advance to anyone who finds that triggering. This is not a story about me being diagnosed with cancer. I have, to this day, so far, never received that diagnosis. Yeah, oh, thank you. Yeah, we can all cheer for that one. However, I have lived my life in mortal fear of hearing those words. For good reason. I mean, we all have good reason. But for me, it's like for many of you, it's personal. My aunt died from pancreatic cancer, my uncle from melanoma, my sister-in-law from duodenal adenocarcinoma, very rare one, she was in her 20s, and both my parents, lung cancer. So, yeah, I have lived in fear of hearing that diagnosis myself. And I have done everything I can to prevent hearing that diagnosis, including perhaps bugging my doctors profusely whenever there's a little spot on my skin that is suspicious, or when I have a stomach ache that won't go away, or when my back hurts. I will go to the doctor and demand that they check it out, even if they don't think they need to. And of course, I also always get all of the prescribed tests. I do my due diligence. And yet with all of this fear and diligence, I have somehow never been afraid of my breasts. I've never really thought of them as containing potential cancer, which is weird because breast cancer was actually the first cancer that came into my life. When I was 11 years old, my mom, breast cancer. She had to have a mastectomy and radiation and chemotherapy. And I don't know why, it just never worried me the way every other type of cancer out there has. Maybe it's because that's not the cancer that killed her, or maybe it's because I didn't have breasts when I was 11, I didn't care about hers. Or maybe it's simply that at 11 it just didn't sink in. So I went through my whole life worried about every other type of cancer than breast cancer until I turned 35. Now, I have been self-employed my entire life, which is another way of saying too poor for health insurance. So despite wanting to go and get every possible test, I've also tried to save money. And what I did for getting my annual exam, what I know a lot of other women have done, is I went to Planned Parenthood. Thank God for Planned Parenthood, right? And they are great, and they kept me alive and sane for many years. But then I got married at 35 to a man with health insurance. Which is not the only reason I married him, but it was sweet. And I thought, we're trying to have kids. I'm going to go to one of those spa-like OBGYNs for my next annual exam. I was excited. And it turns out the procedure feels pretty much the same as when you go to Planned Parenthood. But the difference was that when I walked into this place, Capital Women's Care, in case anyone cares, they took like a 20-page family history. And then after the doctor was done with my examination, she sat down and she talked to me for a long time about that family history, which for me is very long and varied. And she said, okay, what I don't see on here is the results of your first mammogram. And I said, I'm 35. I don't need a mammogram for at least 15 more years. And she said, oh, that's for normal people. Yeah, your mom had breast cancer at 33. And what we like to prescribe is that you go in for your first mammogram the year before your parent had breast cancer, which was like the worst thing anyone could ever say to me, because I realized I was 3 years behind on this exam. And in that moment, I was instantly sure that my breasts were just riddled with cancer. So as soon as I got the referral, I ran out, I made the appointment for my mammogram, and I got it for as soon as possible. And then I went for the mammogram, and I was freaking out. I was nervous. I was mostly nervous because I was sure that I was going to go in there and they were going to be like, oh man, that is a lot of cancer. But I was also nervous because I heard that it hurts. And for the ladies in the room, I will tell you, it doesn't. It's fine. No, I'm just kidding. It really, really hurts. But it really, really, really hurts when you are, young and perky, haven't had a baby or menopause yet. Because, whether they're smushing something that is deflated or they're smushing something that is really dense, they're still smushing something. And it hurt a lot. It was not a pleasant experience. I was shaking walking into the room, and then I got in there, and the lady took my boob and put it on a tray and smushed it, and I started crying because it hurt like a lot. And then it was over, and I was like, whew, I can get out of here. But then she said, wait. And she did something on the computer. So I'm standing there in my robe in this little room with this woman who's not talking to me, and she sends something off on a computer, and then a second later a phone rings. And she picks up the phone, and she says, okay, I understand. And she hangs up the phone, and she says, you're going to need to wait. The radiologist wants to do more tests. Which is the other worst thing you could say to someone like me, because now I am freaking out even more. And now, if you've not been to the breast imaging center, there's two waiting rooms. There's the waiting room for the public, the people who have clothes on. And then there's the waiting room for the rest of us who are just in our little robes. That's sort of a series of changing rooms. So I go back to my changing room, and I am shaking. I am sure that this is horrible news. They don't send everyone for a second test. What does this mean? And I'm just trying to hold it in and try not to lose my shit. And the person in the changing room next to me starts sobbing hysterically. She is just crying her heart out, and I'm just like, oh my God, she just heard the worst news, and I'm about to hurt. It was horrible. And then the radiologist comes out and gets me, and she takes me back for this other set of tests, which turns out to be a sonogram. Why do they not start with this? Seriously, a sonogram is so easy. They put gel on your boob, they rub a camera around, and they're like, okay, you can go. It was amazing. But I was waiting for her to tell me anything, and they don't tell you anything. They just send you home and tell you the doctor's going to call you with the results. So I'm freaking out. I get home and I lose it because I'm home now, I'm safe. I just start crying hysterically. I call my husband up and I'm crying, I have cancer. And he says, wait, what? Oh my God, honey, I'm so sorry. What did the doctor say? And I say, I have to talk to a doctor, but they sent me for a test and then they sent me for another test. And he's like, okay, wait, so who said you have cancer? And I'm like, no one, but I know I do. And it is funny now because I didn't. 2 days later, I got a call from the doctor who said it was a cyst and it was nothing to worry about. But at the time, it was horrible. It was so horrible that I was like, I am so glad I am done with that and I don't have to do that again for another 15 years. Yeah. The next year, when I went back for my annual to that luxury spa-like OBGYN office, she again handed me a referral for a mammogram. And I said, no, I did this last year. And she said, oh, honey, you get to do this every year for the rest of your life. And I said, no, I don't like it. It's horrible. It hurts. And she gave me some good advice. She said, for those of you who are young enough to hear this advice, schedule your appointment for a week or several days after your next period, because you're less sensitive after your period, and take some Advil or Tylenol before you go in, because then you won't feel as much pain. So if anyone needs that, you're welcome. And I did. I took her advice. I scheduled the mammogram. I'm a good patient, and I went in. I scheduled it for after my period. I took some Advil. And I gotta say, this experience was a lot different. Not only because it was less painful, but also the technician was just really nice. She was she brought me into the room, and she said, you know, this is gonna hurt, but I'm gonna try to be as gentle as possible. And she brought me over. She scooped me up and she smushed me, but she had me take some deep breaths, and it was okay. And then she started doing the thing on the computer. And I was starting to freak out a little bit. And she said, listen, I do this for everyone. I send it off to the radiologist. I gotta tell you, there is a good chance she's gonna ask for more tests. It's completely normal. They always want more tests. Don't worry. When she calls back and says she wants more tests, it's not a big deal. And 2 seconds later, the phone rang. She picked it up. Sure enough, I had to wait and get a sonogram. But I went back to the little changing room, and I just felt okay. Because that woman had taken 2 minutes to explain to me that this is not scary. And I was not freaking out when she did the sonogram, and I was not freaking out for the next 2 days while I waited, and I was not freaking out when that phone rang and they told me that it was nothing to worry about. And so now, my mammogram, my annual mammogram, is just something else I do on my long list of tests that I get to make sure that each and every year I hopefully continue to hear not a diagnosis of cancer. Thank you.